the tide always leaves something behind. Welcome back to Celtic Otherworld horror stories, where ancient myths blur with modern memory and the truth hides in the spaces between. This week's tale, The Faceless One, picks up weeks after the binding ritual at the Standing Stones. But though the sea has quieted, something older has stirred. A figure appears, silent, watching, and wrong. A figure no watcher has ever spoken of. What follows is not just a haunting, but a revelation. Because some faces are forgotten for a reason, and some memories were never meant to return. If you enjoy creeping dread, unraveling identities, and folklore reimagined through a cosmic lens, make sure to subscribe, like, and listen with the lights low. Now, step closer to the threshold. This is The Faceless One by Ceri Clarke.
The first time I saw him again, I thought it was a trick of the mist. It was late afternoon, the air thick with the scent of rain and brine. I had been walking the cliffside path that wound its way around the farmhouse, hoping the exercise would quiet my thoughts. 3 weeks had passed since the ritual at the Standing Stones. 3 weeks since I'd bound myself to this place, becoming a watcher to hold back what lurked beneath the tide. I was neither fully here nor fully gone, a guardian existing between worlds, a sacrifice freely given. The tide had finally receded to its natural rhythm, but the sea still carried whispers, distant and low, curling beneath the crash of waves. Though the hunger beneath the water had been contained, it was not silent. It called to me constantly, reminding me of what I had done, what I had become. I had spent the last few nights listening to those whispers, feeling them crawl along the edges of my dreams. The tide had spoken my name, and I had spoken back. But that afternoon, as I rounded a bend in the path, I saw him. A figure stood at the tree line, just where the fields gave way to dense woodland. He was tall, dressed in a long, dark coat that stirred in the wind even though the air was still around me. His form was solid in a way mine no longer was. I had grown accustomed to seeing the world through myself, my hands translucent in certain lights, my feet leaving no imprints in the damp earth. But this figure was different. He cast no shadow despite the low slant of the sun, and when I focused on his face, I realized he had none. Not hidden beneath a hood, not turned away, just smooth, featureless skin where eyes, a mouth, should have been, a blank void of pale flesh. A cold weight settled in my stomach. I blinked, and for a moment, he was gone. But when I turned my head, I caught the briefest glimpse of movement between the trees. He had not disappeared. He had stepped back, watching. I should have been used to impossible things by now. I had spoken to the tide. I had bound myself to ancient standing stones. I existed in a liminal state between life and death. But something about this faceless figure always sent a primal chill through me. The other watchers had never mentioned him. That night, I did not sleep. I rarely needed to anymore, just another change since the ritual. But I would sometimes retreat to the farmhouse, settling into what had been my bedroom, letting myself drift into something like slumber, a half state where I could almost pretend I was still fully human. But that night, I sat upright in bed, listening. The house groaned in the wind, the fire in the hearth long since burned to embers. But the sound that unsettled me the most was the pacing. Soft, deliberate footsteps moving just beyond my window. A slow circuit tracing the perimeter of the house. At first, I convinced myself it was an animal, but the steps were too measured, too human. Every so often, they would pause, lingering beneath the window as if waiting. And then they would move on again. I gripped the covers, heart pounding. My mind screamed at me to look, to pull back the curtain and confirm what I already knew. But I couldn't, because I knew that if I looked, he would be standing there, the Faceless One. The other watchers had gathered at the shoreline, their translucent forms barely visible in the moonlight. They stood as they always did, in a loose circle facing the sea, guardians of the threshold. I should have been with them, but something had drawn me back to the farmhouse tonight, a compulsion I couldn't explain. Now I understood why. The Faceless One had called me here, away from the others. The footsteps paused again, directly beneath my window. A soft scratching sound followed, fingertips trailing across glass. Then a pressure, subtle but unmistakable, as if someone were pressing their palm against the pane. I felt a corresponding pressure in my mind, a probing, searching sensation, like fingers rifling through my memories. Images flashed behind my eyes, a book with my name written in it, standing stones glowing in the dark, the tide rising to claim me, a wooden carving with too many eyes watching from above a fireplace. And then older memories, ones that didn't feel like mine. A ship arriving at a rocky shore centuries ago, a bargain made in blood, 7 stones erected in a circle, something vast and ancient sealed beneath the waves. The pressure intensified, and with it came a voice, not spoken aloud, but echoing directly in my mind. "You've forgotten what you are." The glass of the window frosted over suddenly, ice crystals forming in intricate patterns. Within them, I could make out symbols similar to those on the standing stones, but subtly different, older perhaps, or drawn from a different language entirely. And then, as quickly as it had begun, the pacing resumed. The footsteps circled the house once more before fading into the distance. In the morning, I found the footprints. The rain had softened the earth, making the impressions clear. They circled the farmhouse, their path never deviating. Not animal prints, not boots. Just deep, perfectly human footprints that never led away from the house, only around it, as if whoever, whatever had made them, had simply appeared and disappeared at will. Most disturbing was what I found in the soil directly beneath my window. A symbol drawn with deliberate precision. It resembled the sigils I'd seen on the standing stones, but with subtle variations. Lines that curved where they should have been straight, angles that seemed to shift when looked at directly. At its center was what appeared to be a face with blank features. I kneeled to examine it closer, and as my fingers hovered above the soil, the symbol seemed to pulse, as if responding to my presence. A wave of dizziness washed over me. For a moment, I felt disembodied, my consciousness expanding beyond the confines of my form. In that expanded state, I sensed something. There was a presence, vast and ancient, watching from beyond the veil of reality. It knew me, not as I was now, but as I had been, as I would be. The sensation faded as quickly as it had come, leaving me gasping on my knees in the damp earth. The villagers did not meet my eyes as I passed through town. The barman, who had once been friendly, turned away as I approached. Even Mrs. Hughes, the historian, seemed reluctant to speak. They could see me, another oddity of my condition. Though I existed between worlds, the locals could perceive me, though they seemed unsettled by my presence, as if they knew what I had become. "The man in the woods," I said to Mrs. Hughes, my voice quieter than I'd intended. "The one with no face. Who is he?" She hesitated, her teacup clinking against its saucer. We sat in the back room of her small shop, surrounded by local artifacts and dusty books. "You shouldn't be seeing him." The weight of her words settled over me. "That means others have." A pause, a sharp exhale. "Years ago, before you, before the last one, and before her." She turned the pages of an old ledger, her fingers brushing names I did not recognize. Names that resonated with a strange familiarity. "He only appears when the time is near, when the veil thins." The veil? Between what? She did not answer, but her gaze flicked toward the cliffs, toward the standing stones. "You should leave." "I can't," I said. "You know that. The binding ritual had tied me to this place. I was a watcher now, neither fully alive nor fully dead, existing in the threshold state to maintain the seal." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Then you need to understand, he is not a man. He never was." "Then what is he?" She lifted an old box from beneath her desk, its wood darkened with age. From it, she withdrew a small journal bound in cracked leather. "This belonged to my great-grandmother. She was keeper of the histories before me. The journal was filled with drawings. They were meticulously rendered sketches of the faceless figure I had seen. In some, he stood among the standing stones. In others, by the tide's edge. The dates underneath spanned centuries. "We call him the Herald," Mrs. Hughes said. "He appears when the cycle is about to change, when what waits beneath the tide evolves." Evolves? I thought we contained it. I completed the ritual. The binding is temporary. Always has been. Her voice was gentle but firm. The binding doesn't destroy what lies beneath. It only postpones. And each time, it requires more. The first binding needed only symbols carved in stone. The second, blood freely given. The third, a life willingly surrendered to become a watcher. I felt cold. And the fourth? She met my eyes. "That is what the Herald comes to announce." That night, I locked the doors of the farmhouse. It would not help, but I did it anyway. I stoked the fire, let the light chase away the gathering dark. I told myself I would not sleep. I would listen. I would wait. But sleep found me anyway. And I dreamed. I was standing in the woods, the trees stretching impossibly high, their branches twisted into unnatural patterns. The air was thick with mist, swallowing sound, muffling breath. And in the distance, just beyond the reach of my vision, he stood. The Faceless One, the Herald, closer than before. I tried to move, to step away, but the forest floor had become liquid beneath my feet, dragging me downward. The air was thick with something ancient, something that smelled of damp earth and forgotten places. I could hear the trees creak as he stepped forward, closing the distance between us. He raised a hand, beckoning. In the dream, I could see through my own skin, down to the bone, down further to something else. A light, a pattern, a signature that wasn't fully human. It pulsed in rhythm with the tide I could hear crashing in the distance. The Herald reached out, his featureless face tilting as if in curiosity. When he touched me, it wasn't my skin he made contact with, but the light within, the core of what I had become. And suddenly, I was elsewhere. I stood on a shore I didn't recognize, rocky and barren, beneath a sky that contained two suns. The sea before me was not water, but something else, a shifting, sentient darkness that breathed in perfect synchronicity with my own heartbeat. Standing around me were figures like the Herald, dozens of them, all with blank, featureless faces. They were watching the darkness in the water, waiting. One stepped forward. He was taller than the rest, with a presence that commanded attention. When it spoke, I understood despite the lack of a mouth. "The seedling grows well in its new soil," it said. "Soon it will be ready for harvest." The others nodded in unison, a gesture both familiar and profoundly alien. "But there is resistance," another said. "The local organisms have created barriers. They have learned to bind." The tall one made a sound like laughter, though it had no throat. "Their binding is based on ignorance. They think they contain us, but they only shape us. Each cycle, we grow stronger, molded by their rituals, fed by their sacrifices." The scene shifted. I was looking at Earth from above, but not as it was now. Pangaea, the supercontinent, whole and unbroken. And I could see them, dark patches in the ancient oceans, spreading, connecting, growing. "We have seeded 1,000 worlds." The Herald's voice echoed in my mind. "This one is nearly ripe." I woke with a gasp, the taste of soil thick on my tongue. And outside, beneath my window, the pacing had stopped. The next day, I returned to the standing stones. The wind was high, pulling at my coat, carrying the scent of salt and rain. The tide was coming in fast, waves slamming against the cliffs as if the sea itself was restless. The other watchers were there. Translucent figures stood in their eternal vigil. They turned as I approached, their faces solemn. Among them, I recognized some from Eleanor's descriptions in her journal. These were men and women who had made the same choice I had, becoming guardians of the threshold over centuries. But there was something different about them today. Their forms seemed less substantial, fading at the edges, as if they were being unmade. "What's happening?" I asked, my voice carried away by the wind. The oldest among them, a woman whose clothing suggested she had lived centuries ago, spoke in a voice like distant bells. "The cycle turns, the binding weakens." "But I completed the ritual," I protested. "The seal should hold for 100 years. "Time moves differently for them," she said. "What we measure in centuries, they see as moments. The herald's arrival marks the beginning of the next phase." I moved between the stones, tracing the symbols carved into their surfaces. I had seen them before, the same spirals, the same interlocking patterns that I had found in the carvings above the farmhouse fireplace. The same ones that had marked the stones along the beach. But now, I saw them with new understanding. They weren't barriers, they were conduits, not containing what lay beneath, but channeling it, directing it, shaping it. We hadn't been protecting humanity from what waited in the tide. We had been cultivating it. I felt him before I saw him. A shift in the air, a presence pressing against the edges of reality. Slowly, I turned. He stood on the other side of the stone circle, just beyond the threshold, where the grass met the earth. His coat did not move in the wind. His head tilted slightly, as if waiting. I stepped forward. He did not move. "What do you want?" My voice was barely audible over the wind. No response. But I felt it. There was something pressing against my mind. A suggestion. A whisper without words. Images flooding my consciousness. Ships crossing the void between stars. Spores drifting through space. Seeking fertile worlds. The slow, patient colonization of 1,000 planets. I stepped closer. The symbols on the stones glowed faintly, pulsing like breath. I could hear the sea crashing below, a steady, hungry rhythm. Another step. I was inside the circle now. The air felt thicker, the space around me stretched and distorted. He raised his hand, and slowly, impossibly, the blank skin of his face began to shift. A mouth forming from nothing. No lips, no teeth, just an absence. A space where something should not be. And then he spoke. "You were never meant to remember." The words sent a violent shudder through me. The world seemed to tilt, the ground beneath my feet unsteady. Memories surged, flashes of things I had never lived, faces I had never known, places I had never been. And yet I had. I saw myself on that alien shore, among the faceless ones. Not as a visitor, but as one of them. I saw the seeding of countless worlds, the patient cultivation of life, the slow transformation of entire ecosystems to serve a singular purpose. Harvest. I stumbled backward, out of the circle. The wind howled. The faceless man did not follow. But his voice remained. "You are waking, and they are waiting." The tide surged against the cliffs, a deafening roar that swallowed everything. And when I looked up again, he was gone. But I knew he would return, because I had seen his face, and it was mine. That night, the other watchers gathered at the farmhouse. Their forms flickered like candle flames in a draft, growing more transparent with each passing hour. "The binding is failing," the ancient woman said. Her name had been Eliza, I now knew. She had been the first, binding herself to the stones over 500 years ago. We are fading. Soon, there will be nothing between them and the world above. "Why did you never tell me?" I asked. "About the Herald, about what we really are." "Because none of us knew," replied another watcher, a man whose clothing suggested he had lived in the early 1800s. "Each of us discovered it in our own time when the Herald came to us." "So what happens now? The cycle turns, the binding fails, and what waits in the tide just rises? Takes over?" Eliza's ghostly hand passed through mine as she tried to make contact. "Not if we renew the binding, but the cost will be higher this time. Higher than becoming a watcher. What more could there be?" "Remembrance," she said. "Full awakening to what you truly are." The concept sent a cold wave of dread through me. The glimpses I'd seen in my dream, of that alien shore, of the faceless beings watching their handiwork spread across worlds, had felt both horrifyingly foreign and achingly familiar. What am I? My voice was barely a whisper. One of them, Eliza said. One who chose to forget, to become human, to live among us, to learn. A spy, added another watcher bitterly. A bridge, Eliza corrected. The only hope we have. If the Herald has shown himself to you, it means you're remembering. And only the fully aware can recreate the binding in a form that will truly contain what waits below. But if I'm one of them, why would I help contain them? Eliza's form flickered, her features momentarily replaced by something else. Something with angles that hurt to look at, with depths that shouldn't fit within a human silhouette. Because not all of them want the same thing, she said. Some seed to harvest, others seed to share, to create new life in their image, yes, but life that can exist alongside them, not merely as food. The implication was staggering. I wasn't just caught between human and watcher. I was caught between competing factions of something far older, far vaster than either. How do I remember? I asked. How do I wake up fully? You must go to where it began, Eliza said. The first seeding, the original shore. Where? Follow the Herald. He will show you. As if summoned by her words, a cold wind swept through the farmhouse. The fire dimmed, shadows deepening in the corners. And there, just outside the window, stood the faceless figure. Watching, waiting. Dawn broke gray and solemn over the cliffs. The tide was higher than it had ever been, waves crashing against the rocks with unnatural force. The standing stones were completely submerged now, only the faint glow of their sigils visible beneath the churning water. The watchers had faded almost completely, their forms barely perceptible in the pale morning light. Soon, they would be gone entirely, the binding broken, the seal failed. And what waited beneath the tide would rise. I stood at the edge of the cliff, watching as the Herald moved along the beach below. He paused occasionally, drawing symbols in the wet sand, symbols that glowed briefly before being washed away by the encroaching tide. A path, a map, a way to what Eliza had called the original shore. I made my way down the narrow path to the beach. The Herald did not acknowledge me as I approached, continuing his methodical drawing in the sand. But when I stood beside him, he paused, head tilting in that now familiar gesture of recognition. Show me, I said. He reached out, his featureless face turning toward mine. His hand hovered over my forehead for a moment, then pressed gently against my skin. The world dissolved. I was falling through layers of memory, through strata of identity. Human experiences peeled away like old wallpaper, revealing something older, vaster beneath. I saw stars being born, planets forming, the cold void of space crossed by ships that were both mechanical and organic, pulsing with a life of their own. I saw the seeding of Earth, spores released into primordial oceans. The slow evolution of life, shaped subtly by influences from beyond. The rise and fall of civilizations, each one bringing the planet closer to readiness. And I saw myself, not as a human, but as one of them, a dissenter, one who argued against the harvest, who proposed coexistence instead of consumption, one who volunteered to forget, to become human, to learn what it was to be prey rather than predator, to find another way. The memories crashed through me like a tsunami, reshaping my understanding of everything I had been, everything I was. When the tide of recollection finally receded, I stood on a shore I recognized from my dream, rocky and barren, beneath twin suns. But it wasn't a dream this time. It was a memory, my memory. The Herald stood beside me, but he was different now. His blank face had features like mine, yet not, more angular, with eyes that contained geometries impossible in human anatomy. He was me, as I had been before forgetting, before becoming human. You remember now? He said, his voice resonating directly in my mind. Yes, I answered, my voice strange to my own ears. I remember everything. Then you know what must be done. I looked out at the dark sea before us, not water, but the collective consciousness of our kind. The seeders, the harvesters. They won't listen, I said. They never did. That's why I chose to forget, to become one of them, to find evidence they were worth more than food. And have you? Found evidence? I thought of my human life. Brief, fragile, filled with longing and loss and love. Of the book that had written itself. Of the faceless man at the standing stones. Of binding myself to become a watcher. Sacrificing my humanity to protect others. Yes, I said. They're worth saving. The herald, my original self, my reminder, nodded. Then you know how to recreate the binding. Not to contain our kind, but to transform them. To make them compatible with human life. It will change both species forever, I said. That is the point of seeding worlds, he replied. Not to consume them, but to create something new. Something neither species could become alone. The dark sea before us pulsed, aware of our discussion. I could feel the competing factions within it, those who wished only to harvest, to consume, and those, like us, who sought symbiosis, transformation, evolution. The binding must be remade from both sides, the herald said. From within and without. You must return and complete the ritual at the standing stones. I will work from this side, guiding the collective toward acceptance. And if they resist? If the harvesters win out? His features shifted, expressing an emotion beyond human understanding. Then Earth will be consumed, as so many worlds before, and we will have failed. I nodded, understanding the weight of what must be done. Send me back. The world dissolved once more. I stood on the beach below the cliffs, the tide surging around my ankles with hungry intensity. The herald, now just the faceless figure again to my human perceptions, stood before me, his hand still pressed against my forehead. But I remembered everything. The watchers had gathered one last time, their forms barely visible now, flickering like distant mirages. I know what to do, I told them. Eliza nodded, her ancient eyes holding mine. We sensed the change in you. You've remembered. Yes, and I know how to remake the binding. Not to contain, but to transform. To create something new. The tide surged higher, water swirling around our waists now. The standing stones glowed beneath the waves, their sigils pulsing with an urgent rhythm. What must we do? Eliza asked. Join with me, I said. Lend me your memories, your experiences, everything that made you human, everything that made you choose to become watchers. One by one, they approached, their ghostly hands touching mine, their forms merging with my own. With each touch, I felt their lives flood through me, loves and losses, hopes and fears, all the small moments that defined humanity. When all had joined with me, I waded deeper into the tide, feeling the pull of what waited beneath. The herald followed, standing at my side. Now, I said to him. He nodded, reaching out to touch the nearest standing stone. As his fingers made contact, the sigils flared brilliantly, their pattern shifting, evolving into something new, a bridge, not a barrier. I placed my hands on the stone as well, channeling through me all the memories of the Watchers, all the experiences of humanity, all the understanding of what waited below. The stone grew warm beneath my touch, then hot, then searing, but I would not let go. The tide surged around us, rising to my chest, my shoulders, my neck. I could feel it, the vast consciousness beneath the waves, curious, hungry, resistant, but also listening, also changing. The sigils on the stones blazed white-hot, then began to spread, flowing like liquid light into the water, into the air, into the earth. A network forming, connecting, transforming, binding not to contain, but to unite. I spoke the words of the ritual, not in Welsh this time, but in a language far older, the language of my original kind. Words that reshaped reality, that bent the barriers between species, between forms of consciousness, words that opened the door rather than sealed it. The tide pulled harder, dragging me under, but I was not afraid. I knew what waited beneath was no longer the enemy, but the future. A future where humanity and the cedars would merge, evolve, become something neither could have imagined alone. As the water closed over my head, I saw the herald's face shift one final time, becoming fully formed, fully realized, becoming mine. And then the transformation began. Decades later, a young woman walked along the shore where the standing stones had once been. The stones were gone now, but the beach was dotted with strange luminous growths, part coral, part crystal, pulsing gently with an inner light that matched the rhythm of the tide. The villagers no longer feared the sea. They lived in harmony with it. Their bodies subtly changed. Their minds expanded. They could hear the water's voice now, could feel its consciousness brushing against their own. A symbiosis, not a replacement. The young woman kneeled by one of the growths, placing her hand against its warm surface. It responded to her touch, glowing brighter, sending images directly into her mind. Memories not her own, of ancient stars and primordial oceans and the slow, patient evolution of two species into one. And deeper, older memories. A faceless figure standing at the tree line, a ritual at the standing stones, a choice made to protect, to transform, to unite. She smiled, understanding flowing through her. She was neither fully human nor fully cedar, but something new, something better, as were they all. The tide came in, gentle and welcoming, and within it she heard whispers, not threatening now, but familiar. The voice of the one who had remade the binding, who had bridged the gap between worlds. The one who had been human and cedar and watcher and herald. The one who had made a face for the faceless. The one who had saved them all.
They never spoke again of what was found behind the stones, not in daylight, and not with their backs to the door. But sometimes, in the comments, you'll see them. The others who've seen it too. Those who remember faces that never belonged to anyone at all. If you're still listening, you already know what to do. It waits where the next story begins.